Woodstock. You are here at our weekly Thursday night Meet the Artist lecture series. A couple things before we get started tonight. I want to mention that our upcoming workshop with Andrew Moore is currently on sale, 30% off until tomorrow. So we're hoping to fill a couple more spots in for that great workshop, which will be focusing on photographs, landscapes of the Hudson Valley. And that workshop will run October 4th and 5th. Also, I should mention that we're trying to grow our membership numbers. So if you're interested in getting involved with CPW and being a part of the activities we have going on here, please consider joining becoming a member. Tonight, we have Andy Satter speaking about his diner project. Andy Satter is a photographer who transforms everyday moments into richly sensorial experiences where history, place, sound, sight, and smell converge. His images embody the lyrical documentary style, first associated with Walker Evans, which prioritizes a poetic, emotional, and aesthetically driven approach to seeing. Growing up in New Jersey, Andy learned photochemistry from his grandfather at the age of 9. In the mid-1970s, while studying film, photography, and psychology in Boston, he apprenticed at a commercial studio and freelanced as a jazz concert photographer for the Christian Science Monitor. Andy's photographs of renowned architect Bruce Goff in 1976 were recently acquired by the Art Institute of Chicago and are now part of its permanent collection. In 2023, Andy discovered an unmarked box in his basement, presumably lost during a move 25 years ago, and that box contained photos from this same Boston period, and it celebrates the lives of blue-collar workers in the United States. This discovery became the foundation for the Diner Project, a community lost to progress, an exhibition that will also be the subject of a forthcoming photo book. Andy and his wife have lived in the Hudson Valley since 1998, so please join me in welcoming Andy Satter.
Thank you, Adam. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. Hot early September. I mean, it's hot, hot, hot. It's 1974, and I'm taking courses at a film and photography in a rundown industrial neighborhood of East Cambridge, Massachusetts. Vacant and overgrown lots, abandoned cars, and chain link fences, lots of chain link fences. It's lunchtime, and a classmate and a future roommate of mine and I are walking around, and we stumble upon a nondescript building jacked up on cinder blocks. We see tradesmen milling around outside. I approach a middle-aged guy, construction worker, gray uniform, name embroidered on his shirt, pack of hard pack cigarettes in his pocket, American flag patch on his sleeve. And I ask him, do they serve food in here? Looks at me. You bet, kid. We were hungry. We were curious. We went in, and I immediately fell in love. Looking back, discovering the diner was like discovering Cheers without alcohol, years before Cheers was even invented. Before we go in, I want to invite you to participate in a brief thought experiment with me. It'll take 2 minutes, which is just 1 minute longer than it took for the original Polaroid 95 to develop a picture. So if you're willing to participate, get comfortable, close your eyes. Make yourself comfortable. Imagine the smells of butter and sugar, and coffee, and bacon, and cigarette smoke. It's an olfactory bouquet wafting in the air. And then notice how the midday sun pours through the frosted etched glass windows and backlights the smoky air. It's like a spotlight shining from heaven. As your pupils adjust to the interior light, you're aware of many conversations, some louder, some softer. Plates and silverware rattling, lots of laughter. The room comes into sharp focus, and you notice the curved ceiling and panels, the small black and white tiled floor, and 20 customers, mostly white, mostly male, seated at stools at the counter, some standing. And you scan the room and you zoom in on their hands, calloused, some speckled with paint, and then on their faces that reveal so much if you happen to notice. It was 1974 on the outside, but it was 1947 inside. Finally, you notice an elderly man in a white restaurant uniform, face covered with warts, toothless, humming and whistling Irish ballads as he holds court at the counter. This beehive of humanity is Russ's Kitchenette Diner. Welcome. Please open your eyes and meet Russ. So Russell Young was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, around 1915. And he moved to Boston as a young boy. He worked as a dishwasher when this diner opened in 1938. World War II started. He enlisted. He got married. He fought in the infantry. He came back from the war. He got divorced. He went back to the diner, worked as a dishwasher. And then the elderly couple that had started the diner retired and sold Russ he sold the business. And Russ kept the business until 1978 when he lost his lease. The diner was crowded, and Russ somehow was able to move up and down behind the counter. He definitely had arthritis. I think he had wounds from the war. He never talked about it. He never complained. He whistled. He smiled. He told jokes. He held court. Meet Charlie Diamandis, Charlie the cook. Charlie was born in Greece, came to Boston as a young boy, served as a cook in World War II, came back, worked for Russ until the diner closed in 1978. Charlie was a family man. Meet his two sons, that's Harry on the left, Nick on the right. At the time of this photograph, Harry was in high school. Nick worked as an accountant for the Transit Authority. On Saturdays, the three guys would run the diner. And they had a blast. It was almost like a little fraternity house. They just had so much fun. And they loved to ham it up. And over time, they became comfortable with me. So we do a lot of different photographs. Some inside, some outside, some goofy. And Harry always wore his bow tie on Saturdays. So what's kind of crazy is, go back, Charlie died in 1991. Nick tragically died. He fell off a ladder in his house doing a home repair when he was 45 years old in 1995. And today, Harry's 65 years old. Charlie adopted me like a third son. And on Saturdays, I would go. I was going out of town to go hiking or camping or skiing, whatever. He would make me breakfast, and then he would put together a go bag for me. Apple turnovers, cupcakes, like, carbs. But that was his way of showing his love. And he was just the kindest man. When I had my show, we didn't have a lot of wall space, so we tried an experiment, and we ganged these up in a montage. Adam, I think this was your idea to do this. And it's called snapshots, and it kind of tells more of the story than just seeing one photograph at a time. And I hope it conveys like the warm, loving vibe that these folks had. You felt like you're coming into their kitchen, into their living room. Charlie was incredibly hardworking. He would be the first one to show up, usually around 3 a.m. And he would start off by peeling 200 pounds of potatoes by hand. And then he would start baking fresh pies. That's black and white cookies, cakes, muffins, turnovers, and rolls. Everything was fresh every day. And then he often was the last one to leave around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because the diner's hours were roughly like 4 a.m. until 3 p.m. And this is Charlie. This is called cleanup time. So not only did he turn the lights on, but he basically turned the lights off. And what you're seeing here is there's a separate part of the diner. So there was the front part of the diner, and I'm going to take you inside that in a moment. But there's also there was a separate diner car that was bolted on. And this actual car ran up and down on the railroads. The front part was never on the railroads. It was designed to look like a railroad diner car. And they were very popular in the 30s and in the 40s and the 50s. At one point, there were 6,000 regular diners in the United States. We're down to about 1,500 now. So the diner as an American institution is vanishing. So what's a great diner without a great waitress? Meet Jerry. Jerry Silva was a Portuguese American, born and bred and grew up in the Boston, Cambridge area. She worked at this diner for 35 years, about 3 days a week. She often did short order. And this is some of the food that was served. So you see chowder, and you see some oatmeal and some other things that were in the back. It was probably like Salisbury or Sloppy Joe's or whatever it was. But everything was fresh. Charlie made it fresh every day. This is Russ, and he is making coffee. And what I was really amazed by, one of the things, I wasn't conscious of it then, but I was looking back through my work. I pay a lot of attention to people's faces and to their hands. So I was very much interested in how his hands were manipulating this and putting the coffee into the filter. And then things that would be lying around back in Charlie's kitchen: onions, potatoes, tomatoes. And this is Jerry. This is called Jerry's hands. So she would slice and butter the rolls. And again, we did a montage of this one as well. So this is the food or the sustenance. This is what was served at the diner. So Jerry, on the surface, looked like she was tough as nails, but she was actually soft as butter on the inside. And she used to take a lot of shit from the customers, but it was done in a very kind, loving, impersonal way. It was never mean-spirited. It was never sexist. It was just gentle ribbing. And she loved to dish it back. And they loved it. There's this like this, if you think of Cheers, how they used to tease each other. It's like that. It was really quite remarkable. Anyway, she worked there until the diner closed in 1978. And then I found out just this last year that she also passed away shortly after that. I knew she had been suffering from breast cancer and hence the wig on her head. But she never complained about it. She's always had a smile on her face. She always asked, "How are you? How are you, hun?" The regular hun, right? So I want to stop for a moment and create some cultural and historical context. So remember, this is 1974 to 1977. So shortly before I started photographing the diner, I read this book, Studs Terkel Working. I have to have a rubber band to keep it together. And if those of you who are not familiar with the book, Studs Terkel went around the country for a few years and he did oral interviews with people engaged in all different types of employment. And he wanted to ask them, what is your work? What is your work? What does it mean to you? What do you love about your work? What don't you like about your work? And how does your work either make you a better person or how does it diminish you? And one of the things that struck me about the book, about his work, is the happiest people were not the ones making the most money, were not the executives. The happiest people were the ones who worked with their hands, who could see the byproduct of their labors, and who felt they had agency. So some more context that what I think is so special about the people in this project is that they were all blue collar, they all worked hard, they all felt like they had agency, which means they had some control of their life. They had a job for life if they wanted it. It wasn't a job that was going to make them rich, but it was a job for life. They could support a family, and they had dignity. Now think about how many people today fall into that category. I think that number has diminished a lot. So that's part of the context that I'd like you to hold right now. Some more things about the period. Richard Nixon had just resigned because of the Watergate scandal. The US was getting its ass kicked in Vietnam, and we were running for the exits. And the United States self-image as invincible was badly shaken. Not only our self-image, but around the world. The great giant was trembling. There was a lot of divisiveness in the country. Gee, we don't have that now. Thank God, right? There were busing riots in Boston. So a federal judge mandated integration of the Boston schools, and there was forced busing, and South Boston just erupted in riots. And I took this photograph on a bus in Boston. So outside, around the city, they're looting, cars are being set on fire, people are shooting each other. The National Guard has been called in. And yet on this bus, it's like, hum-de-dum, hum-de-dum, hum-de-dum. So anyway, but that was definitely happening in the background, and that was a serious thing. And the last thing I'll give you for context is the Boston Red Sox were in their 50th year of their 86-year drought. They'd have to suffer for another 36 years before they would finally win the World Series. So after my initial visit to the diner, I would go back 2 or 3 times a week over the next 3 years. Sometimes I would go in the middle of the night. Sometimes I go right before lunch. Sometimes I'd stop there at the end of the day when Charlie was cleaning up. And then in 1976, I had to do a senior project to graduate from Boston College. So I did a small exhibit. I took 15 of the hundreds and hundreds of photographs I had, and I had a small show. And the show was done, and everything went into a box. And I had other boxes with my negatives, and the stuff traveled with me sorry, it moved with me 6 times. 6 different moves over many years. And then we moved to the Hudson Valley in 1998, and I just assumed that that box had been lost. But it wasn't. Last summer, our son Max was visiting from overseas, and we were talking about family. I said, you know what, I'm going to go down to the basement and I'm going to look for some photographs to show him, because we have a small family. He's an only kid and not a lot of cousins. So I'm digging around and I find this box. I said, wow, what is this? And I open it up. I said, holy shit, there they are. Those are the original prints. So I think 48 years later, not so bad. And then, I found some contact sheets, and then I found the negatives. So then some serendipity or some synchronicity happened. I bumped into Nadine, an old friend who I hadn't seen in years, and we're catching up. I was in the supermarket or something, and she tells me she joined the board of CPW. And I said, what's that? So Nadine explains to me. It's like, wow, funny you should mention it, because, and I told her about my discovery, and Nadine, you invited me to come up. And so I came up, and while I was showing you my stuff, you introduced me to Adam. And Adam said, wow, this is kind of cool. What are you going to do with it? And then over the next 9 months, with your incredible coaching and mentorship, Adam, this went from being a dusty box in the basement to a project, which has been on 2 walls so far. And here I am tonight. So thank you. I can't thank you enough for your support and your coaching. Looking back at the project, I realized there are 4 obstacles that I encountered. 3 of them were external and 1 of them was internal. So let me talk about the external ones first. Well, I was a stranger. I was an outsider. So the diner was a closed club of people, some of them who had been eating at this restaurant, this diner, for 35 years. So this long-haired hippie walks in with a camera. And by the way, I didn't have a Boston accent. I'm a Jersey boy, exit 153 on the Parkway. Thank you very much. And they were really suspicious of me. Plus, it was a time when people were on edge. So that was a real obstacle for me to overcome. And so I started thinking, so my still forming 20-year-old brain with a donut hole probably this big in it, I realized I needed to win the trust of Russ, Jerry, and Charlie. But how do I do that? I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. I was waiting on tables at night for $1.07 an hour. I was working during the day for free in a photography studio, and I was taking classes full time. And then I had a light bulb moment. Be generous. So I had a key to the dark room at the studio, so I could print, develop film all night long, and I would take pictures, and the next day I would develop them, and then the next day I would print them, and then I'd go back to the diner, and I would gift Russ and Charlie and Jerry with the prints. So these are called photos within photos. And it wasn't too long before these made their way up onto the wall. You can see it over here. Okay, and this is Russ's Canadian background. And it wasn't too long before the regular guys said, well, wait, that's kind of cool. What about me? And I think this is the first recorded episode or incidence of FOMO that you're missing out. So anyway, so being an outsider and winning them over, that was number 1. The second challenge, or the second obstacle, was a technical one. So I was shooting with a Nikon, that's my camera. I also did a few of the images with a Graflex 4x5 camera, speed graphic 4x5. But this was that was my trusty camera. That's what I shot with. And early on, after seeing scenes like this, with with the light coming, this reminded me of if Robert Frank was there, he would have wanted to take that picture. It's because of the light, not because it's such a great picture. I decided, I made a decision. I'm not going to use a flash. I'm only going to use natural light. So once I made that decision, I then began to realize as I was developing film, I've got challenges. One, because there was a lot of light, but often there wasn't. So I didn't have much depth of field. And sometimes even with the camera stop way open, I had pushed the hell out of the film in the darkroom. So some of the negatives, when I developed them, I would hold them up to the light, and I think there was nothing there because they were so thin. I thought they were just garbage. And it only was until this year when I digitized everything, they started to see that they were genuine, like they were diamonds in the rough, like this one here. So this one, this year is the first time I ever saw this because it was so thin. But the digital technology was able to extract enough information that we were able to, I say we, but my friend Tillman, who did my retouching, was able to reconstruct it. So this is called counter service. So I showed this to you for two reasons. One, because it was an example of a technical challenge that lemon was turned into lemonade, but also the diner itself was a community where people of blacks and whites and Latinos, mostly men, there were a few women, but they came together. And even though Boston on the outside was blowing up, it was very civil. People were kind. They laughed. They enjoyed each other. And they left all of that crap at the door. They had the ability, they still had the skills to communicate and to engage with people who may think differently than they did without it becoming personal. And that's something that I believe we've lost today. And I think this project resonates now because of what we've lost. We've lost this cute Americana diner, but we've also lost a way of being. And these folks embodied a way of being that was very civil and respectful, regardless of who you were. Wow. The third obstacle, that was two. I lost track here. Give me a second here. Oh, well, okay. So it was I was an outsider, and then it was the light, and then the chemistry was the third. Okay. The fourth obstacle was the hardest for me, and it was an internal obstacle. And this is the one that I really had to push myself. I grew up in Clifton, New Jersey, which was known as the Lily White City because it was redlining. It was surrounded by totally integrated communities. The Clifton was just white, white, white. It was a lot of Clifton was working class, but there was some middle class. We were middle class. I was raised in a Jewish middle class family, right next to a development that was all working class, blue collar, cops, truck drivers, firemen. A lot of them were immigrants from Eastern Europe. And as a little kid in grade school, because of being Jew, I was bullied, and I was not more than once referred to as the Jew on the hill because our house was up the hill from where this development was. So isn't it ironic that I find myself in this small room, a diner, surrounded by cops, firemen, and truck drivers. And so I talked about the need to win them over and to build trust with them. But what I needed to do was I needed to trust them. I needed to let go of what had happened to me when I was just a little guy. And I believe that that was what enabled me to take these pictures. I was able to let myself be comfortable, to let my guard down, to be with them. So these are the denizens. These are the regulars. This was done with the 4x5 speed graphic. This was done with the speed graphic. And occasionally there were surprises, you know. So this is a man who comes in wearing a three-piece suit. It's like, where did he come from? Obviously his GPS wasn't working that day. And then, you know, he's eating, and then somebody said to me, you know, you never want to take a picture of somebody eating. But I couldn't resist. But look at his hands. And this is another example of, I never printed this because the negative was so thin originally. And when we digitized it, I said, wow, I didn't even realize there he was in profile. So some of the photographs in the beginning, most of the photographs in the beginning I took where I was on the customer side of the bar or the counter. But as I became more comfortable and more accepted, you know, they called me, everybody had a nickname, and somebody nicknamed me the Kid, or I think Russ used to call me the Kid. So I started feeling more comfortable, and I eventually had free reign of the place. So pretty sure I was standing on top of the counter when I took this picture. If you look above the heater there, that's Jack Dempsey. It was the Brockton bomber, heavyweight champion. And this is a magic corner. You're going to see some photographs. There was something, the light in this corner was crazy. But also, energetically, there was something about the corner. So another surprise, one day, these young guys come in. Having a very nutritious breakfast, coffee with 6 sugars, a donut, and English muffin with jam on it. This is one of my favorites. A dad was coming, he shows up with 3 young kids. I guess they're going to band practice. And so I say, what do you guys got in there? And he said, well, we got your trumpets. And I said, how about a little concert? Sure. So they went outside and they started blowing their horns. So another thing to remember is that it's 1974 was the time where Ireland was experiencing the Troubles. You know, the war between the IRA and the Crown, so to speak. And I didn't know this at the time, but this current year, I met with a filmmaker who made a film about the diner, which I'll talk about in a minute. And he was telling me that one of the guys who was a regular at the diner was peripherally connected with the Irish mafia. Peripherally. And the Irish mafia was running arms to the IRA in Belfast through Boston. So, but I didn't know that yet. But this is what I did know. I'm in the diner, and you know that old saw, stranger walks into a bar. It's the beginning of a joke. Stranger walks into a bar. Well, stranger walks into a diner. So I'd never seen this guy before. And he's over there, there's still payphones. He's at the opposite end of the diner that I said, this is a really interesting thing. And I'm just looking at the light shining off of his leather jacket and looking at the look on his face. And wow, there's something going here. He walks over and he meets somebody. That's the corner. You see where here's Jack Dempsey. Here's the clock, right? And looking at him saying, wow, what are they talking about? And this is one of the few times I ever use a telephoto in the diner. Because I knew that if I went up to them, they'd say, get the fuck out of here, kid, right? So I very quietly popped on my telephoto lens. And I'm looking, thinking, wow, what are they talking? They're not talking about the Red Sox. What are they talking about? And then I pull back and notice how intensely the guy whose back of his head is to us is focusing. Look at the length of the ash on his cigarette. He's dialed in. Anyway, I just thought they were curious. But then in March, I learned that the whole thing about potential connection to the arms running to the IRA. And I'm wondering, I'm not saying that's did happen here, but I'm saying, wow, maybe, just maybe that's what they were talking about. So more of the denizens. This next one cracks me up. It's like, yeah, you could cigarette machine and you could just stand in the middle of a diner and smoke. Things have changed. And I love the kitchen. That's the light switch.
Yeah.
He looks like he's had a day, right? Rough day. That's back in that corner again. The magic. That corner is like a light box. And then for my the show that I had recently, we ganged these up as well. So again, it's all natural light, no flash. See the photographs made them on the wall. Double mint gum. And I love it. This kitchen's closed due to illness, Russ's illness. Yeah. And this guy, I probably have 40 pictures of this next guy. And this is the only one that he's not staring at the camera. He had the spidey sense that his picture was being taken, and then he would just ham it. But his nickname was the Creep. I don't know why they call him the Creep. So now we're getting towards the end, endings and goodbyes. So in the fall of 1976, I decided that I was going to move to New York City to pursue a career as a filmmaker. That's another story. And so I still wasn't thinking that this was a project, but I did know that there were photographs of things that I wanted to take before I moved. So one of them was the cash register. And I love the pricing, cheeseburger, 80 cents. Jell-O, 35 cents, but my very favorite is chocolate Puddha, 40 cents. And then again, having just free reign of the house, taking this next picture of the pastry display from behind the counter. It's all fresh stuff that Charlie made every day. And then I started to notice these reflections. Because I was paying attention to the pastry display. I said, oh, what if I get on the other side? That's interesting. And then there's this photograph, which is kind of, it was ubiquitous, of Russ drinking. Russ drank a lot of water, lots of water. But then I realized I had overlooked this like for 3 years. It's like, holy smokes. Water glasses on the counter, drying, and the light hitting it just right. And that's Russ at the end of the day. And I look at this now and I say, you know what? This was very prescient of him. He was seeing the end. Somehow he was feeling it. He was seeing it. And so my last trip to the diner was in February of 1977, and I took this self-portrait. And then I moved, put my stuff in a box, and kind of lost it for a long time. And then years later, I heard that the diner had been moved. It closed. They lost their lease, and it moved to Allston, which is like the next borough next to Boston. And then so I was able to find this photograph. It was moved by a team of horses through the streets of Cambridge. And one thing I didn't say is that, so this was like, the diner was located 5 or 6 blocks away from MIT. And there was another diner near MIT called the F&T Diner. And that was world famous because Nobel laureates would meet there and talk about particle physics and relativity and quantum theory and so on and so forth. It's kind of like upstairs. And then you walk 5 minutes to Russ's Kitchenette Diner, and they were talking about, you know, the Bruins, how the Red Sox suck, yada, yada, yada. And that was downstairs, so close, but yet worlds apart. And as Russ's Diner, after it was sold, it was being carted off. It went past the F&T Diner, over the Charles River to Allston. And it was opened as an ice cream parlor for about 18 months. And then it was sold and closed and sold again. And it was moved to New York City to Hell's Kitchen. I had no idea. I was living in New York. I had no idea. 39th and 9th. It was there for about 2 years. E. Macambolio's ice cream. And then there was the crack epidemic. It went out of business. It was sold one more time, and it moved down to Minetta Lane downtown. And then it was vandalized, and then the city demolished it. So it was the end of an era. So I hadn't been back in 48 years, and I went back in March, and I met David Sutherland, the filmmaker who made this beautiful, sweet movie called Down Around Here about the diner. And we walked down to the part of Cambridge where the diner used to be. I was wondering, what's there? And this is what's there now. It is storage units, co-working space, parking lot, and condominiums. Sorry? Condominiums. Yeah. Yeah. The neighborhood is very different. You would never know. If you hadn't been there before, you would just never know. That's where this is. So that is my show. And I'd just like to put in a little plug for a few people who've been really helpful. You can find me if you want to see this again. But David Sutherland, Down Around Here, you can watch it on Vimeo. It's a beautiful, beautiful, sweet 27-minute Super 8 movie about Russ and the diner. I also like to put in a plug for Richard Gutman, who's the foremost scholar on the American diner. He's an architect, and he's been studying diners his entire life. Right now, he has an exhibit at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. It's called Diner Man, and it's all about the American diner experience. So if you're passing through Detroit, check it out. This is one of his 7 books on the diners. Russ's Diner is in this book. And anybody who wants to go down the diner rabbit hole further than tonight, Larry Coltrea runs this awesome blog on the diners called the Diner Hotline. And he knows everything and anything about the American diner. And you can find him there. So thank you. And I'd love to answer questions or comments. Yeah.
Well, this is really basic. And these one was there was one image in, I think it was 1977, but most of them were 1974.
They're sprinkled throughout.
What was the first question? What was the length of time
Mhm.
that you took these photos? Like how much time transpired
Right.
over that period? And the other question is, did you have any intent on before this presentation? They weren't shown to anybody. You just took them and you put them up.
So the period that the photographs were taken were September 1st, 1974 to probably the end of February of 1977. It was a finite period of time. And when I go through my negatives, I see most of the photographs, not necessarily the best ones, but most of them were taken in 1974, early 1975, for a couple of reasons. One is I was doing the film and photography school right there. And also, I hadn't yet gone, I was going to school, I was working at night. So I was just sort of ramping up for all of that activity. And so it's when I had the most free time to do this. Yeah.
When you did your exhibition at school with the 15 photographs, did you get an A?
Yes, I did. Oh, and I failed to mention a couple. I'm sorry. I wanted to say this, and I neglected to. So, somebody asked me, make sure you tell the folks who influenced you as a photographer. So you heard that my grandfather taught me how to develop film when I was 9. But then my early heroes were the 3 Edwards, Curtis, Weston, and Steichen. And then I started getting into Cartier-Bresson and getting into Robert Frank and into Eugene Smith and Dorothea Lange. And I had a teacher during this period of time named Jim Stone, who had taught and had worked with Minor White at MIT. And he helped teach me the zone system for black and white printing. Yeah, Joy.
I really appreciated when you black and white because you really see the subject matter. I can also appreciate how much the light attracted you. My question is, the latter picture at the end, I was surprised how small the diner was. You could see that at the end. So I'm wondering how you felt about how the smallness of the space, which you couldn't see in the earlier pictures. How's the smallness of the space do you think affected sort of the intimacy of the community of what was going on?
Yeah, I like that question. It was a small space. From the diner itself was approximately 30 feet on the inside. It was 30 feet long, and at its widest, from the windows to the wall behind the counter, was only 12 feet.
You couldn't tell that.
So it's 360 square feet, and the ceiling, it was sort of domed. It wasn't real high. I don't think the ceiling was, this is probably maybe a 12-foot ceiling. it was not this high. It was probably more like a 10-foot ceiling. It was very, I mean, sometimes when there was an ebb and a flow. Sometimes it was low tide, sometimes it was high tide. And when it was high tide, it was like a beehive, you know, and it was like being in a crowded bar during happy hour. And so, you know, you excuse me, you know, to walk around, excuse me. And sometimes, you know, but it was fine. You know, people were relaxed. Nobody became aggressive or defensive. One of the things that I learned pretty early on was it has to do with respect and trust. That I didn't just start taking pictures, but rather I needed to feel comfortable myself, and I needed for my subjects to feel comfortable. And I knew I was going to come back there again. It wasn't a one and done. And so for me, in retrospect, it was a campaign. It wasn't an event, because I knew I was going to come back again and again and again and again. I just didn't know how long I would be coming back. And also, I didn't know how short the diner's life expectancy was. Yes.
I'm just trying to picture you like working in that environment, and I imagine like doing that now, and people would stop. So I'm like, were you trying to imagine how you did it? And were you kind of just hanging out and eating yourself, and just kind of like occasionally taking a snatch, or were you like stalking around? Like, did people ever just get stopped?
No. So it's such a different world now. I mean, if I tried to do this today, I would have a broken jaw, you know, a busted nose, and I probably, you know, 14 different lawsuits filed against me because people are saying, what are you going to do with it? You're going to monetize this. You're stalking me. You're going to put it on the internet, blah, blah, blah. So there was none of that at all. And again, because I was working through my insecurity, I was careful not to be aggressive because I didn't want somebody to punch me in the nose, right? I would eat there. Yeah, I definitely ate there. I tried to become normal as opposed to somebody who stood out, although I didn't exactly dress the part. And then I would say, hey, I'm studying photography down the street. You mind if I take your picture? And that worked. Yeah.
Did you write that you were also a psychology major or double major in photography and psychology?
Yeah.
I'm curious because from the pictures, you know, there's so much humanity, so much love for the place comes out. And whatever you were talking about, you can also see from the photographs. And I was wondering if it was, you know, going back time to time to take these photos, was it really about photography, or was it a connection or a psychological experiment, or feel this for the place, or getting to know the people, which, or both? I don't know.
Yeah, I love that question. It was about the people. Yeah. I mean, there were so many different places to photograph. You know, the world was my oyster, but it was about the people. There was something special. You know, Russ was not highly educated, but he was a very wise man. And if you ever watch the video, he talks about his philosophy. And he says that, you know, we have a lot of friends here. Some are new, some are old, but we never give up the old for the new. You know, we're always polite to people. People are always welcome to come here. Some have been here 30 years, 35 years. It was definitely, for me, I think that it was, in a way, it was almost like an extended family, distant extended family that I never had. And it was a happy place for me. And at that time of my life, it was not a happy time in my life. So I would go there, and if some people go to the gym and they say, I always feel better when I go to the gym. I feel like crap when I get there, but when I leave the gym, I feel good. And I never left the diner feeling worse than when I went. I always felt better. I always felt better. Yeah.
So
Right.
how are you going to go about
making this into a book?
Thanks for that question. So I have 3 goals. The first goal is to have a proper exhibit in a respected gallery. So I've had 2 shows this summer, which were great, but they were small. So I'm aspiring for a larger show. That's number 1. Number 2 is a photo book. And just this week, I started week 1 of Adriana Alt's photo book class right here at CPW. And if anyone's ever thinking of doing a photo book, it's great. So far, so good. I'm loving it. And the third goal, which is really a stretch goal, is an installation. So you would come into a large either museum or gallery space, and you'd smell the coffee, and you'd smell the sugar and the butter. You'd hear the ambient noise of the plates. What I did with you with the guided visualization, silverware rattling, people laughing. There'd be several screens looping video. I actually shot 400 feet of black and white film of the diner in 1976. It's in good shape. I haven't digitized it yet, but so I can imagine that looping. And doing interviews, maybe an interview with Harry, the son who's still alive, and tracking down any of the survivors. Many people are no longer with us. And then you would walk through the curtain or the pocket door, and you would see a replica of the inside of the diner, and then you'd see the photographs on the wall. So that's while I'm still here, that's what I would love to achieve. Yes.
You thought about actually doing it in the Boston area, the Cambridge area, and finding some of those people?
The answer is yes. And I've been in touch. So the city of Boston has a historical archive, and they've asked me for they want to be the repository, the digital repository of my images. And I said, maybe later, but not now. So they're helping me to find a place. But right now, I'm still looking for a place. Warren?
Yeah, this is related to some of the other questions, but did your style evolve over time in terms of like focusing on hands, focusing on, it seemed like certainly portraiture faces were critical, right? So, but how did that evolve over time? Did you grow as a photographer?
What comes to mind is the image of a funnel. So I started off kind of a wide angle lens, and over time kind of narrowing down. I think I paid, it wasn't conscious. And so I think I'd have to go back and look at the chronology maybe. I would guess that as I became more comfortable, the portraiture became more intimate. Yeah. Sean.
One of the pictures, there was a radio, a little radio on the counter. Was that radio on?
Yeah. You'd walk in,
What was it doing to?
big band music sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd walk in, or else it'd be a ball game on, depending upon the time of day. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Sheila.
Can I add a 4th goal?
Can you what?
Can I add a 4th goal for you?
Please.
A lot of the things that you have all talked about, I feel like are caught in your self-portraits. From your first self-portrait to the final self-portrait is a completely different image of you in terms of comfort and style, and so much went on. I think in the psychology of being in the space that impacted you. That would be a great study. Those 2 self-portraits.
Thank you.
And one now.
Yeah.
Noted. Yeah. Yes, Joy.
Just describe a little more the connection between the David Sutherland film. So you knew him at the time, or you knew him later? So he was doing something similar.
Yeah.
And then he was doing motion.
So David Sutherland grew up in Boston. His father owned a tire store 3 blocks from the diner. And as a little boy, on Saturdays or after school, he'd go to Daddy's store and he'd hang out. And he'd take him there to get a milkshake or a hamburger or something like that. So he was always fascinated. But he became a filmmaker. And then he learned that the diner was closing in 78. So I stopped photographing in 77. He had been filming it off and on over the years, but when he learned that it was closing on June 1st of 78, he did this sprint to get as much as he could. And it wasn't until about 1997 that he finally finished that movie and submitted it, and he's won several international competitions with it. And he's gone on to become quite an accomplished documentary filmmaker. So I had heard about this movie over the years, but didn't know anything like who had it and whatever. But when I got in touch with the city of Cambridge last fall, Viv Williams, who's one of the archivists there, told me, there is a film about it. I said, I've heard it, and she gave me a link to. She put me in touch with David, and David and I talked, and then he told me how I could watch the film. And then in March, he and I actually got together. And I'm guessing he's listening right now. If you are, hi, David.
You know that this theater in New Falls shows all kinds of films, and you've seen some big
Yeah.
documentaries, and they might even be willing to show some.
Great idea. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. One more, or one and done? Or are we done? I think we're done. Thank you. Yeah. Commercial pitch. I'm selling packs of 5 postcard images from this show. There are 5 postcards for $10. They're back there if you want them.
They're beautiful.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.